Hey, good morning, Bronx. Mr. Williams here. Hey, I was able to sneak out for tuna the other day. I didn't get a lot of it on video, but it was pretty awesome. It was one of those last-minute trips that just kind of came together. I did not get a bunch of fish, but I ended up getting three really large albacore, probably enough for just one really good batch of tuna. So I'm going to talk about canning tuna today, one of the best things in my opinion on the planet. So if you take a look historically, fishermen started canning tuna around the turn of the century, like 1906. There was a fisherman off the west coast that was canning sardines. He was in the sardine business, kept catching tuna and decided, hey, I'll go ahead and try to can this. Tuna at that point in time were really considered a trash fish. Wasn't really worth that much, but the product that they were able to get out of it was a really bland tasting fish. Now, I say bland, but when you've been eating sardines and anchovies or whatnot, yeah, tuna does not taste fishy like that at all. When I was a kid, my brother and I used to eat sardines like all the time. We would sneak them into the house and open up a can and eat them with a cracker, and they would smell up the whole house. My mom would come home from work, take like one sniff and say, hey, you guys had sardines. And my brother and I would have cleaned up the kitchen, taken the trash out, but she just knew because sardines were super fishy. Albacore tuna is not. It doesn't taste fishy. It was first marketed as a fish that tastes like chicken. It was marketed as chicken of the sea. So now you go, 100 and some odd years later, and that's what StarKist has as their motto, is chicken of the sea. So anyway, canned tuna, fantastic. But home canned tuna is by far the best product on the planet. So what I'm canning it is a super simple process. I was able to figure it out really quickly by searching the internet a little over 10 years ago when I started tuna fishing. So if I could do it, anybody could do it. So what you start with is you start with your tuna loins, and I've cut up a lot of these chunks already. I removed all the blood and kind of excess goo and scales and slime, because when you're cutting up fish, you're typically in a hurry. I'll bag everything up in Ziploc bags, and then I come back to it when I'm ready to can it or eat it or barbecue it. I want to make sure that all the goo and stuff is removed. So I've taken all these chunks and cut off like little excess blood vessels, made sure there's no fish scales on them at all, so they're all ready to go. What I also do is I take my jars. I use wide mouth pint canning jars. I make sure they're washed and cleaned and ready to go, so I'll put them in the dishwasher, make sure they're absolutely clean. I will also put them on a stovetop in boiling water for a few minutes, just to make sure that, hey, any kind of impurities that are in there are killed and are remedied and are taken care of. So I take a wide mouth pint jar, kind of set it up as such. I cut up chunks of tuna, and I just go ahead and fill up each one of these jars, making sure to take up all the excess space, and just kind of go from there. What I also want to make sure that I'm doing is not getting any tuna on the top of that rim, and I'll explain that here in a little bit. And that's another reason why we use wide mouth pints. You're not using regular mouth, because you want to make sure to get as much tuna in there as you can. The other thing that I'm doing is I'm making sure I'm not going to overfill the canning jar. I don't want to go any higher. You'll notice here, I'll lift up the jar. I don't want to go any higher than where this ring is at on top. Okay, so that leaves just about 3/4 of an inch or so from the top of the canning jar. So you can see I've got this stuffed in here pretty good. It's loaded up with nice chunks of tuna. I'm going to finish this off by taking about a 1/4 teaspoon of kosher salt and just kind of sprinkling that in, just a nice little layer on top. That'll just give it just a little bit of flavor. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a paper towel, and I have a little distilled vinegar, and I'm just going to rub this along the top. That just gives this top piece just a final cleanse before I put a lid on. So I'm going to reach over to my stove, step aside, and I'm going to grab a lid, and I've placed these in warm water because this lid has a rubber, you can see the rubber piece that goes all the way around. What you want to do is heat that up just a little bit to make it pliable, to make it more so it's like flexible. So you know when rubber is warm, it's more flexible, it isn't as rigid, and just by heating that up will allow it to stick better onto the top of the canning jar. And the final little coaching point I have as I step aside, I will go ahead and put on the rings before I put it in the jar, and I'm just gonna screw it on, but I'm not gonna screw it tight. I'm gonna go right to where it wants to stop and no more. So this jar is ready to go into a canner. The canner holds 16 of these jars, so I'm gonna go ahead and continue to work and fill up the other 15 jars and load up the canner. And while I do that, I'll have you I'll show you some shameless bragging fishing pictures. So give me a few minutes, I'll go ahead and load up the canner. Bronx, we are all ready to go. I've got 16 jars all set and ready to go into the pressure canner. This is just a typical pressure canner. You could buy them at any general store like Walmart, Walmart. They run anywhere between $70 and $90. You could get them on sale. Pretty inexpensive. If you take care of them, they'll last a lifetime. I'm sure if you dug around in your parents' or grandparents' garage, you're likely going to find one, maybe even significantly older, which kind of digresses into another topic. Most of our grandparents, my grandparents, probably your great-grandparents, they canned their food a bunch. If you had relatives that went through the Great Depression or World War II, they had big gardens, they canned a ton of stuff. So our society really has gotten away from that, so to speak, but boy, there's nothing better on the planet than canned albacore tuna. So I love doing this. The product is fantastic, and it's the best tuna sandwich you'd ever have, or tuna casserole. So what we do, I've got my wide mouth pints. I've loaded all these up with tuna. I'm just gonna stack them in here. Go ahead and fill this canner, and while I'm doing that, and while my dogs are barking outside at the neighbors, just living that one up. If you go back historically, tuna was probably most popular in through the 50s, 60s, and 70s. One of the most popular dishes in the 50s was a tuna casserole. Tuna casseroles are super, super easy to make. You're just taking egg noodles, cooking those up, taking a can of Campbell's cream of mushroom soup, adding however much tuna you want to add. You can put cheese, crackers, crumbs, anything on top, throw it in the oven for a little bit, and voila, you have a super, super simple meal. And in the 50s, that's what people were really looking for, something quick, convenient, that was still pretty appetizing and still pretty good. So after I have all 16 of these jars in the pressure canner, now I'm gonna add a little bit of water. So I'm gonna, I'll do this here in just a moment, but I'm gonna take water and probably fill it up to about 3/4 of height on that bottom row of jars. As you can see here, it's all loaded up. There's 16 of them. It's kind of heavy. Then I've got a lid that I'll put on here, and I'll secure it tight. And then I'm either gonna put it on the oven, inside the house, or even better, I'll put it outside on an outside burner. It's always best to do any kind of fish canning, I think, outside. It's not as much during the canning process, but when you're all done canning and you take this lid off, you definitely want to be outside. One of my friends canned tuna inside the house a handful of years ago. Was all done, let the pressure release out of the canner, opened up the lid inside the house, and it smelled horribly bad, and his wife had to buy new drapes. So we definitely don't want to do this inside the house. This is an outside job. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this on the burner outside. The typical recipe is to build up pressure. You'll see the pressure gauge right here. You want to take that up to about 11 pounds of pressure, between 11 and 14, not less than 11, not more than 14. And once it hits that 11 pounds of pressure in that zone, then we set the timer for 100 minutes. So after 100 minutes are done, I'm going to turn off the heat on the burner and just let it depressurize on its own. I've got a pressure cap which goes on this little chimney right here. So once it reaches pressure, I put this on this little chimney, and that'll help maintain that consistent pressure throughout that entire time. So we go ahead and put that on the burner. I might show you a few more shameless fishing pictures, and we'll reconvene when this is all done. Okay, Bronx, we're out here. This batch is done. It's been on the burner for quite a while. And basically what we're looking at, I didn't show you where it was at, but on this pressure gauge, I turn on the burner until this pound meter shows it's between 11 and 14. When it gets to that point, I just adjust the heat on the burner to make sure that it doesn't go any higher than that. And we cook that for 100 minutes at that pressure. So what I've done now, the 100 minutes is over. It is depressurized. I'll take the little chimney piece off, and I'm just going to go ahead and crack this open. And as I crack it, you can kind of smell a little tuna smell. That's because those jars will kind of burp out a little bit of the tuna as you're cooking it. And so now I'm just going to start pulling each one of these jars. And you can see, which is really cool, it's still kind of cooking in there. It's still boiling, still working itself out. And as I pull these out, you'll hear an occasional little popping noise, and that popping noise is the lids, each one of these lids, kind of sucking down, which means that they are appropriately sealed, and they'll literally last for years. And be really, really tasty. Ideally, I don't let them sit for years. Well, I'll end up eating them within a year or two. I give a lot of this away, especially if I catch a lot of tuna. If I don't catch a lot of tuna, I don't give much away because it's such a special treat. So that's our finished product. We're done, and you can hear, I could hear each one of these things popping, which is really, really cool. So that's our finished product. It's a beautiful looking jar of albacore tuna, ready for your favorite sandwich or tuna casserole, or one of my favorite ways to eat it, just a little cream cheese and a cracker. So enjoy, Bronx. I hope you've enjoyed this video.